Get ready to dive into the vibrant world of mapmaking with Heather Smith on this episode of Geographical Thinking. Heather spills the beans on her cartographic wizardry, revealing how she mixes creativity with data to craft tutorials that'll have you mapping like a pro in no time. We'll explore everything from the fine balance of aesthetics with precision to the critical role of accessibility in the cartographic realm. So buckle up and join us as we navigate through the ever evolving landscape of cartography. Welcome back to Geographical Thinking. I'm Michelle Brake, and I'll be your guide as we explore ideas, stories, and conversations through the lens of geography. Joining me today is Heather Smith, a cartographer, artist, and principal GIS content engineer at Esri, where she writes and edits tutorials. She has worked at Esri since 2015 and lives in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Thank you for joining me today, Heather, and welcome to Geographical Thinking.
Thanks, Michelle.
How are things going? I know we're nearby. I'm in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. You're in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. It's nice to have someone on my coast for once.
Yeah, it's exciting to talk to someone in the same province for work-related things. Very
I
cool.
know, and same time zone even, because you're
Yeah,
working across into Pacific time zones. I'm sure that gets a little difficult.
most people I work with don't even know this time zone exists. So,
That is fair. We also then get the, oh, wait, there's a Newfoundland time. They're like, that's not real. A half hour difference. Could never. Awesome. So, as I mentioned in your intro, your background includes art and GIS, which makes a lot of
Mhm.
sense when you think about cartography. But I'm wondering, which came first, the art or the maps?
The art came first, actually, and I still practice as an artist today. I make woodcut prints. But after I finished my BFA, I was looking around for a decent day job. And at the time, I was looking at a lot of the trades programs at NSCC, Nova Scotia Community College, but I wasn't particularly excited about any of them. And then I had this true epiphany moment. I was driving with my mom, and she said something like, "Oh, I wish I had a map that had this on it and that, and it told you this other thing." And it was a throwaway comment, but I said, "Oh, if I went to that school that my brother went to, he's a surveyor, I could make you that map." Um, and as soon as it came out of my mouth, I knew, well, obviously I should do that. That's perfect. I applied to COGS the next week. I was already using maps in my art. I had this big collection of them from the map library at school, and it was drawing on them and painting on them. So I was already used to thinking of maps as these designed objects that somebody had to make all these aesthetic decisions about how to depict the information. Um, so I didn't know what GIS was, but I guess I knew what map design was in a way, and I just thought it sounded perfect for me.
I mean, it sounds like the perfect mix. And as a fellow COGS grad, it's nice to see the cartography side that comes out of the school because it's not a side that I personally had a lot of experience with. So it's great to
Hmm.
hear how that went forward. Um, could you walk us through your cartographic process and I guess from conceptualization to your final product? Is it a solution driven by data or the need to answer a question? Or are you inspired by something like a technique or a landscape? Like, oh, I saw this really cool mountain or I went on a hike. I want to map this area.
Yeah, kind of both in terms of what drives the map, but um well, yes and no. Both in one of them, I guess. My maps are really driven by a goal. And I think every map you make should be driven by a goal. You should let that goal drive your decisions, not the data. But that goal doesn't have to be fancy or world changing. Like it could be, I really want to try out this cool technique, or I really want to show how beautiful this landscape is. Those can be your map goals, and once you acknowledge what the goal is, it makes it so much easier to make all of the other decisions, like, oh, what projection am I going to use, what data do I need, what colors will I use, what fonts, what information should be in the pop-ups. I think that these questions are really hard to answer, um, unless you have a goal. If you know that the goal is to show off this cool technique, those questions become a little bit easier to answer, and you end up designing a better map. So as for the process, that's where I start. I start on deciding and figuring out what my goal is. And then I spend a lot of time looking for the right data. and ensuring that I have the right permissions to use that data, which can be difficult. Next, I decide the map's extent, which also requires deciding the projection and the scale. Those three things are really linked. They affect one another a lot. So I work on those. And I like to do that right away because if the extent changes, then sometimes I need to go find more data, which is annoying. And once it's settled, then I experiment with symbology, and I experiment a lot. I never really know what the right symbology is until I've tried a lot of different options and I can compare them.
Okay, so that really helps me paint a picture of kind of what's the process. We got the which came first, maps or art. Now we understand the process. I'm wondering, what are some of the essential tools and resources that you rely on when creating maps?
Well, I work at Esri, so like you, I'm kind of spoiled. I have access to all of the tools in the ArcGIS world, so I don't really have much need to go looking elsewhere. For my cartography, I used to only use ArcGIS Pro, but now like there's so many great tools online, so I'm using a lot of ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Experience Builder, and often actually I use all three of those things together. As for favorite tools within those softwares, I'd say the new color vision simulator in ArcGIS Pro is great. I use it to just see how my map will appear to people with various forms of color blindness. Um, and also in Pro, I'd recommend this tool. It's called the new suggested projected coordinate system. It's in the map properties dialog. I actually had a small hand in designing this feature, so totally biased, but
Ooh,
it's
okay.
really useful. um, so, like, let's say you need to make a map in Newfoundland and you need it to be equal area. There's no out of the box projected coordinate system that's going to suit, but you can just open up this tool and say, here's my extent, use my data of Newfoundland. I want it to be equal area. You can even say, I want it to use the WGS 84 geographic coordinate system as its base because my data is in that coordinate system. And it'll just spit out a projected coordinate system that's perfect for your map. Um,
Okay, so no longer having to run through the like 100-page document of what's the right thing based on where I'm at or
yeah,
like one coordinate system to another. Sounds like it would
yeah.
save me a lot of time.
Um, absolutely. I use it a lot. In ArcGIS Online, I'll also mention the effects pane. I don't know if you've used it much,
Hmm.
but I used to feel pretty limited in there because like they have a lot of color schemes in ArcGIS Online, but I really like custom ones, and it's kind of hard to make a custom one. But now I can just pick a color scheme that's close to what I want, and then fiddle around with the effects, change the hue, saturation, the brightness, and then I can just get whatever I want. It's really really fun.
I personally love using Bloom and Glow. They both
Oh
really just
yeah,
add something to a map. As someone who loves the Firefly projections of various data sets or smart mapping, it's something I do lean myself towards.
oh yeah. If you anyone who hasn't checked out the effects pane is missing out.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, how do you strike that delicate balance between the aesthetic appeal and conveying accurate information?
Well, I think for a map, conveying accurate information should be your priority, and aesthetic appeal is in service to that. Now, like I said before, I'm also an artist, and in art, I think it should be the opposite, maybe. Um, but a map is a map. It's made for entirely different reasons, and I think people also really trust it to be accurate. So you have to honor that trust. But so with map accuracy, I kind of think that there's two ways to think about this. One is simple data accuracy. So are the locations correct? Is the resolution good? Are the attributes accurate? And I don't really think that aesthetics, good or bad, is going to really change those things. So that's data accuracy. I'll set that aside. The other part of accuracy has to do with how well those things are interpreted on your map. With that part, aesthetics matter a lot. It's really easy to give the wrong idea with your map for people to completely misinterpret it. For example, so sometimes I might try out a technique on a map and I'm like, oh, wow, that's so beautiful. It looks so cool. But then I compare it against my map goals. And if it's not helping those goals, I don't keep the cool technique, no matter how cool it looks, because maybe it's making my map too cluttered, too confusing. It's not helping. I can use that cool technique on another map. It's going to help somewhere else. I'll save it for later. So, on the one hand, you can't let aesthetic choices overrule the goals or the accuracy of your map. But on the other hand, you shouldn't ignore aesthetics either. I think sometimes people ignore it in the name of accuracy. But if you do that, you're going to be stuck with the defaults. And that's the easiest way to ensure that people misinterpret your map. Um, Defaults are still a choice and they're not a good one. So, I guess, long story short, I would say accurate information and aesthetic appeal, they're not in conflict with one another. Accurate information should take precedence over aesthetic appeal, but at the same time, you can't really achieve that accuracy without aesthetics to help you communicate effectively. Your data might be accurate, but your map isn't going to be accurate unless it's communicating that data accurately. And aesthetics are the thing that are going to help you do that correctly.
And I think that's an interesting point, especially going from like you need to make decisions, you need to have a clear goal that I like to think that I have when I'm approaching maps, but sometimes I feel like that gets a little lost of like, okay, well, I'm making a map for a purpose. So we're going to show what we need to show, nothing extra. This is going to be a wall map. It's going to be a wall utility map. Sometimes I feel like in the past that it hasn't been a place where I can bring in a lot of creativity, but it sounds like there are some opportunities to jazz those up even a little bit. Maybe it's again not sticking with the default choice. Do we need to use that one shade of yellow for all of our parcels?
No. And actually what you said about like you're gonna keep what you really need and throw everything else out. I think that's like some of the like that's I love that. Like that's what I recommend all the time. And you're gonna end like it's going to be easier to create a really beautiful map if you're just working with one thing, and it's going to be easier to create a really convincing map that way too.
Okay, great to keep in mind. And I'm wondering, how does accessibility then layer in with all of this? Because I know we're already several layers into our cartography lasagna, but where does accessibility fall? How does it play into the equation?
It's just part of everything, I think. We talk about it now as if it's like something new and you put on top of stuff, but um well, you're probably not going to be able to make a fully accessible map that like everyone in the world is going to be able to read under every condition. I don't think that's really possible, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to make your map more accessible. um and well, the easiest way to do this is just don't use red green color schemes. If you're looking for just like an easy fix, don't do that. There's so many people who can't tell red and green apart. um, Use red and blue or green and purple or green and pink. Those are all great accessible alternatives to red green color schemes. And I know like red green color schemes, they look so good, and they're so intuitive, and everybody else is doing it, so it feels like I should do it too, but it's just not accessible. I guess the caveat would be like, oh, if I'm making a map just for myself and it doesn't really matter if other people can read it, it's just going to hang on my wall, then go ahead. Red green's fine then, but any other time, avoid it. Um, Aside from that rule, though, I think like what I was trying to say earlier is it's accessibility isn't really any different from the core concern of cartography, which is always to be thinking about your audience and how they will interpret your map, and that's different from how you will interpret your map. You can tell red and green apart, but maybe your audience can't. So, for example, if I'm designing a map, I'll often think like, oh, here's a map of PEI, and I recognize PEI from its shape. I know where it is in the world. Great. But maybe my audience doesn't. Maybe I need to add a locator map. So that's the kind of common question you should be asking all the time. And if you are doing that, accessibility is coming in constantly. Sure, I can read these labels, but maybe my audience needs them to be bigger. Sure, I can tell which areas have high values and which have low, but let's check in a color vision simulator to make sure that other people will be able to tell those colors apart. Um, I can read this legend. It's got words. It's great. But maybe my audience is partially francophone, and I should make a bilingual legend. So, yeah, I think just think about your audience all the time and remember that they are not you. So that's what's going to help you make a really accessible map.
I think that's some great advice. And I almost picture it the same way where when we're testing applications, getting other people who constantly work with the technology, like that's great. Getting feedback is important, but they also may have some of the same understanding of as you do, and they understand what they're looking at, or some of the processes or workflows that may be intuitive, having used specific software before. Getting outside perspective or thinking from an outside perspective, I think could be really helpful. And I think applying that in a mapping perspective or connotation would be really beneficial. I think that's one of the ones I'm going to file away in my Rolodex for cartography lessons.
Yeah, feedback is awesome, but you're right. Like it's hard to find the feedback of people who aren't like you, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm wondering, with your study of cartography and map making, have you noticed any trends in how processes have changed over time?
Oh, well, cartography is technical. It's a technical skill field. It's always changing and it always will. Um, some people talk about web mapping a lot as this totally separate and different from how maps were made in the past. I don't really think it is. I employ all the same cartographic principles with web mapping as with static mapping. Even when I'm making hand drawn maps, it's kind of the same things that I'm applying, just with different tools. So I'm kind of on the camp of the more things change, the more they stay the same. Uh, I do think though that right now is a really great time to be a cartographer, and that's something that has changed. The impression I get from cartographers who are older than me is that, and I could be totally misunderstanding this, but what I understand is like GIS was invented and then people spent whole decades just digitizing maps and it was really boring. And at the same time, everyone was trying to figure out how to do things digitally. So for a while, map design, it was kind of set aside. It wasn't the biggest priority at the moment. But now we've come out of that. All of our data is pretty much digital. Designing maps in GIS is no longer so difficult. We got blend modes and everything now. So everyone's got time for map design again. And I think everyone's pretty excited about it. I think the GIS world appreciates the need for good map design so much more, even than when I started, which was 10 years ago. When I started at Cogs, I feel like then it was like, okay, that's nice, that looks pretty, but we don't have time for that. And now it seems like people have time for it again.
I agree. And I think we start to see it more and more playing with like the applications that come into a web map and how it's all still part of the picture. We're not just
Mm.
focusing on a map, we're not on one element, but the same thing, we're not just focusing on the app anymore. We're focusing on the map as well. It's again the full picture of what we're
Yeah, the
looking
app
at.
and the map, like, well, I really think the app is the layout for the web map.
Hmm.
And so just like in ArcMap, the map and the layout, you had to work on them together. Online, it's the map and the app have to work together.
I think I just had a light bulb go off of like, okay, this makes a lot of sense, Heather. You're saying some right stuff here that makes sense in my brain.
Oh, good.
So I'm wondering, on the other side of that coin, so we talked about what has changed with advancements in technology and GIS software. Are there any techniques that have stood the test of time?
Um, well, I'm going to sound like a broken record because I'm going to say focusing on your goal and your audience. I think they're always. I mean, that's true for all forms of communication. Maps are no exception to that. I follow the same rules when I'm writing tutorials. Um, but yeah, there's lots of conventions and techniques and trends. They go in and out of style. Like before, we used hashers and then contours, and now we use hillshades. And then other things stick. Like it's probably never going to be true that you should not normalize a choropleth. I don't know if I got my double negatives mixed up there, but you know what I mean. That's probably not going away. But I think as long as you focus on your goal and your audience, and you really, take a critical look at your map as you're designing it, you're going to be able to assess which of those techniques and conventions you need to follow, and which ones maybe you can set aside for this map.
Okay, it sounds like we can keep it simple. We don't have to have a kitchen sink all the time of techniques.
Yeah, and you don't have to memorize lists of them. That's
Ugh, and there's
a big
so
one.
many out there, different things to try. Now, I am wondering for people who are looking to hone their cartography skills and make such beautiful maps like you do, what resources would you recommend them checking out?
Well, a couple of years ago, I designed a course, actually, a self-guided online website course. It's called Introduction to Cartography, and I recently revamped it with some new materials and better organization. So it's better than ever. I think we can include a link to it in your notes somewhere.
Yep, we definitely will.
Cool. So I used to get emails, well, I still do sometimes, from people who want to learn cartography. They want to know where to start. And I used to go and try to collect a whole bunch of links to send to them. But now I have this whole website. It just collects all of those resources, organizes them nicely into chapters. Each chapter has a challenge activity, and you can use that to try out your skills on your own data. And then there's a capstone project at the end. It's got step by step tutorials, videos, and articles. So a lot of these are things I've written myself for the course, but not all of them. And I think the best part is you can do the whole course in ArcGIS Online or in ArcGIS Pro, depending on your preference, or you could do both, of course. I'm sure you're aware of the Cartography MOOC that Esri offers. Highly recommend that, and everyone else does too. It's very popular. But if you missed the sign up, it's running right now, I think. Or like maybe you did it in a previous year. I recommend my Introduction to Cartography course. It's available all year long, so um, you can pick away at that whenever you have time. I've also been making these short videos lately. You can see them on, there's a YouTube playlist called Quick Cartography, and I also post them on LinkedIn. And some of them are also in the Introduction to Cartography course. So yeah, what I do at Esri most of the time is I write and edit tutorials. And when I'm writing tutorials, I find that there's all of these skills and concepts that I want to explain related to cartography, but it's not really the point of that particular tutorial. I don't really have room to go on this long tangent in the middle and explain color theory. So I started making these little videos um, to explain some of these concepts. So yeah, check them out. They're only about 5 minutes long each. I have some on visual hierarchy, legend design, choropleths, color choices. There's a lot to say about color. Actually, I have more coming on color. Um, but yeah, I think they're fun and a good resource for cartographers.
Awesome. It sounds like a great thing to add into my summer refresh of some of my skills. Personally, I'd like to use the summer of that to go back and let's check out what's new. Because as we come out alongside new pro releases, enterprise releases, what
Hmm.
else can I do with the tools?
Yeah, and these ones are also a bit refreshing in that they're not so much focused on tools and more on
Hmm.
the core concepts you can kind of apply in any mapping context, I guess.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. And I'm wondering, what advice do you want to give people when approaching cartography? We've got the skills, we understand some of the process, some of our key considerations. What do you want people to know when they're taking this approach?
I just want them to feel less intimidated. I could be wrong, but I get the impression that a lot of people think that they can't do cartography because they don't have the training, and you really don't need any special training. It does help. So like if you're in a cartography program, don't quit. It helps, but what also helps a lot is trial and error and critical thinking. So when I'm choosing a projection, do I immediately know which one is the right one to use? No, not at all. I pick maybe five that I think seem reasonable. I try them all. I compare them. I ask things like, does this one distort the map in ways that are problematic for my map's message? Does this one make the map look better or worse? Does it just look weird in this projection? Will my audience be confused if I use this projection? Is this kind of a perspective they're not used to? I am not a geodesist, but I know what my map's goal is. I know who my audience is, and that's how I choose a projection. So the same thing goes for symbology methods, colors, fonts, visibility ranges, everything, trial and error, critical thinking, comparing my options to my goals and my audience. So yeah, I can do that without training. Um, the other thing that I think holds people back is this fear of making the wrong choice. You got that little voice in your head that's like, oh, you chose that projection? What were you thinking? That's so silly. Yeah, I mean, I have that voice too. It's like probably not going to get rid of it. But I think one way to combat it is to remember that if you choose nothing, you're going to get the defaults. And that's very unlikely that that's going to be the best choice. That little voice in your head should be going off on the defaults. So, how do you not choose the defaults? I would encourage you to just pick three projections, three colors, three whatever it is you're trying to decide on. Don't overthink which three, just pick three. Try all of them and then compare the results and choose the one that's best for your map. Um, Better if you choose five instead of three, but I think three is enough. It's not going to be the perfect choice, but it's probably going to be better than the defaults. It's at least the best choice out of these three ones. So you're going to get something that's not the defaults, and that's how I design maps. So yeah, that's my advice. Try it out.
Awesome. Thank you for all of that, Heather. I think together that provides a lot of context to how we can approach cartography, even if you don't feel like you're a cartographer at some days. And I think that resource, both the introduction to cartography and the YouTube series, will be a great thing for people to have a chance to review. So thank you for coming on and sharing all of that.
Oh, thanks so much, Michelle. This was really fun.
Awesome. And that's a wrap for today's adventure through the world of map making on Geographical Thinking. We've journeyed alongside Heather Smith, uncovering the secrets behind how she seamlessly blends creativity with data to craft tutorials that'll have you mapping like a pro. Heather's insights have shed light on the ever evolving landscape of map trends over time, reminding us that while technology advances, the basics remain the same. If you're looking for more information about the technical side of GIS, check out the Spatial Report podcast, where Mark and Maggie dive into the latest and greatest in the world of GIS. Until next time, keep exploring, keep thinking, and keep thinking geographically.